It's going to come from Isaiah 55, 8 through 11. And they can be on the screen up here. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. As the rain and snow come down from heaven, you do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish, so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater. So is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it. And I'd like to invite Pastor Randal to deliver the message.
Well, good morning again. I want to make my comments at the beginning instead of the end, because I want the sermon to not be broken up. This sermon that I'm going to share with you, I scratch my head over it because it's a silly little sermon in a way. I mean, it's hopefully very biblical, but it doesn't spend its time pouring through. It's not doctrinal. But you know, over the years and the miles, if I were to die, if I were to die today and people were remembering from various places I've ministered over the years, and they were saying, you know, the sermon that we remember the most will be this one. So I thought it would be fitting and fun. It's one of my favorite. It's just fun. And so it's in lieu of a joke today. It's hopefully not that the sermon is a joke, but it'll open your learning centers as we go along. So anyway, that's the message. Before that, I just want to thank all of you, and you know, I appreciate the affirmation that we ran the course together well. I appreciate the affirmation that I served you well. You know, the missing is mutual. I know as I go down the road, I will do my mourning then. As far as it goes now, you know, it really was. There's no question this was a God thing. I didn't, you know, it was actually Mark Vincent who understood and discerned what was needed. And so we talked it over, and coming in the way I did was a mutual agreement between Mark and I. Normally, you know, we didn't go straight to the business part. We went to the relational part. And I think that was God's leading. He knew what this congregation needed. And you know, the thing is, though, here's what I want you to understand. You have given me maybe more, certainly every bit as much, and I'm not saying that as a public relations statement. It really is true. In so many ways, so many different ways. And I'm not going to take the time now to go through and listen. But there's, you know, just as my wife and I go through our journey together and in our lives, there are certain things that were almost gaps. And you all filled them. You filled the gap of friendship. You know, when you change country, when you go to a strange place where you have no family and friends, it's kind of a wilderness period. I go away from here with friends that are every bit as close as any I have in Seattle. In fact, maybe closer. In such a short period of time. You opened your arms and you welcomed Mark and I. You know, this has been the most successful interim pastorship that I've ever experienced, that I've ever been a part of. And the thing is, though, the reason is because you were so receptive. You opened your hearts to the Lord and let Him in. And I've never had an interim where there was so few problems. You know, if I look since January, literally, except for the fact that we lost some loved ones in a timing that was, you know, not what we wanted, and in a manner that was not what we wanted. If it weren't for the fact that we buried too many people in the time that I've been here, there is not one There isn't one church fight I had to put on my black and white striped shirt and blow the whistle and get involved in. There wasn't one thing where people said, "Oh, I don't want to do. They're not going to go that direction." It was like, which way should we go? Lord, what will the Lord have us do? How can we serve? You know, you don't have to browbeat anybody to do anything. You guys are in there. In fact, it was like I had to set my alarm early to keep up, kind of. You know, that's not so. That's not me. That's God, and it's God in you every bit as much as it is God in me. And Miriam, it's so good to see you there. And you did have an audience, and I think you were doing a Ginger Rogers attempt for that audience. Yeah, whoops. I see you decided not to do the punk rock thing today. She had a nice red streak, just like the punk rockers. And it's out. Okay, I'll leave you alone. Sorry. My last chance to really have fun with Miriam, one of my favorite people. So anyway, I just want you to know, and you know, God is not a God of halfway. He just isn't. God's not a God of schlock. God's not a God of mediocre. When we get mediocre, it's because that's all we'll let Him give us. And so I pray and I expect your full-time pastor to be, you know, nobody's everything you want, but I expect them to be someone that leads, that, you know, that you love to have lead this church and that loves to serve you. And I will be praying for the search committee. And you know, just remember that you can always add experience. You can always add competence if there's character. If there's character, then you have a platform to build on. And so the congregation needs to be praying for and supporting the search committee and all of you working together in unity for the choosing of the selection of the criteria and then the processing of these applications as they come in. And when the one that God is sending appears, you'll know it. You'll know it. In fact, the trouble I hope you have is that He sends you 2 or 3 who are equally good but very different, and you have to kind of scratch your heads and go back and forth over, man, which one? You know, if we go with this one, it's going to kind of be this way. We're going to have this emphasized over here, but they're all good. Which one do we do? That's what you should have. And I don't think God began this journey to give you anything less. So if you just continue to engage and invest in excellence in character, excellence in heart, and trust God for the rest, you will come out the other end with very joyful. And that's the way it should be. And this has been a part of it. And you know what? I refuse to go out of here with a glass half empty. So we know we'll miss each other. We know that we love this. Let's just rejoice together in the time we have afterward. And I'll hop in the car and with your prayers for travel mercies behind me, try to be sane in getting home quickly but safely. And this will just be one of those things in our hearts that we'll think about and say, yeah, life is good and God is good, and can't wait for the next thing to come around the corner. All right, with that in mind, I want to talk to you today. This may sound a little scientific, but I want to talk to you about, well, the name of the sermon is Toody. But the real tagline, the real key is, and if you want to write this down if you're taking notes, God is, I want to say can be, but it's not that He can be, He is, and we can have a relationship with Him as a God who is closer to us. He's closer to you personally than you can be to yourself. Now that may sound a little trite at first, but you're going to see what I mean. God is actually closer to you than you are to yourself. Well, that's kind of hard for a human being to think about. In order to understand that, we need to talk a little bit about dimensions. This sermon actually arose from a speech at a men's club that I was a part of, and there was one of the fellows in the church got up and gave this talk. This was in the 80s, and he worked for Texas Instruments, and he was part of this, wasn't secret, but it was just a really high-level think tank. And he was one of the ones that reported directly to the board of directors, and he was one of the team that was to be thinking out 20 years out, implementing what Texas Instruments should be focusing on 20 years from now. So he was a quantum physicist, and he talked about dimensions. And it blew my mind. He made it so clear, even though dimensions are, what's a dimension? Well, do you know what a dimension is? I can't define, I tried to define, I can't give you an actual dictionary definition, but we know we have dimensions, right? We know we have one dimension, and if you're in art, you have two dimension, and art is all about trying to make something look three-dimensional, which is what we live in, on a two-dimensional flat surface. Okay, so let's kind of break down what a dimension is like. The first dimension, okay, would be a line. It has length, and that's it. Now, if there were a world, a one-dimensional world, it would be on that line. And so what would a point on that line be? If you just put if you put a point and another point, and then you join them, what have you got? You've got a line. But where does that line start? It starts with a point. So life on that line would be a whole bunch of points. And there's some fun little videos out on YouTube, and one of them has got this, it's called Line Land, because that's the one-dimensional world. So in order to tell who's who, everybody has a voice on the front end and a voice on the back end. Go figure. The voices are different, and that's how you tell who's who. You memorize the two voices, and then you can tell which way the person's facing. The guy on this one video is there. He says, "Yeah, he's married. Are you married? Yeah, I'm married. Well, where's your wife? Well, she's." He said, "She's 389 back." In other words, she's 389 line people down because there's no way to go around anything, right? You can go left and you can go right. Okay, now I forgot I had a little tube and I forgot it in the car. But anyway, let's try this. Everybody kind of do your fist with a little hole so you can look through. Okay? Now, those of you who are sitting next to someone, keep this appropriate, please, but turn to them and look kind of close up. Look kind of close up, so you're not looking at their whole face. Now, what do you see? If you were going to describe someone, if you were one-dimensional, and you want to describe a three-dimensional person, what do you see? It's a dot, isn't it? It's a little circle. It's a dot. So if I wanted to introduce myself to a one-dimensional person, I could do it, but they can't perceive me very well, can they? Because they can't understand height. They can't even understand two dimensions. Well, what they would see is what they are. Since they are a dot, and that's all they can see, as I pass by them, and this is their eye, I'd say, describe me. And they say, well, you're just a dot. You're a dot like I am, but you're a navy blue dot. Oh, but you're moving. You're moving because suddenly you're a white dot with some blue and red speckles. Oh, but now you're a navy blue dot again. You see, as I passed across the plane of their dimension, they would only see me as themselves, but strange. Okay? Now let's leave that and go forward and talk about the second dimension. Now, a line is a dot of dots, isn't it? It's a dot of dots. It's a line. Now, if you take that line and you make a line of lines, what do you get? You now have length and you have width or height. So you have two. And if if we frame those out, well, we might have a rectangle, we might have a square, we might have a triangle, we might even have a circle, because everything would have height and length, but no depth. And that's the second dimension. Starts with a line, adds lines, and becomes length times width. Now, this is one dimension away from us. Okay? You could, if you put your fingers like this and did the same thing to your neighbor, what would you see? You'd see a line of color, wouldn't you? And so if I was going to introduce myself, well, let's do this, because for the purposes of this sermon, I actually have a visitor, a guy named Toody. Okay? And he's from the second dimension. Now, we need to be very careful because, he doesn't know. He can't perceive. And this is all very scary. But here, let me bring him out. All right, here's Toody. Mr. Two Dimension. See, actually, this is cheating, because I didn't want him looking too strange, so we have clothes. But you see, Toody's flat. This is his eye. And everything he sees is a line. But we in the third dimension can look right through it. We can see everything about it. Toody had a dream recently, he was telling me about, that Toody was in Lineland. And he was really frustrated because they wouldn't believe he existed. He could see everything about them. He could see the front end and the back end. He could go down, he could move across and see wife at 389 back. He could meet the family. They couldn't perceive him. They could only see him when he crossed their plane as a dot. So if I want to, they thought he was kind of a trickster, a hoax, a myth. Well, Toody, compared to us, is the same. If I want to introduce myself to Toody, he had a really tough time believing that I exist. I was just a voice out of nowhere talking to him. And eventually I said, Toody, I want you to know me. I want you to perceive I'm real. I'm just very different. And I can perceive you. I want you to perceive me. Well, so what I did was I would cross his plane. And how would he describe me? Well, you're a lion like I am. Well, what do I look like? Well, you've got a little black dot at the bottom of the line. Then you've got kind of dark gray, and then all of a sudden it's a blue line. You're just a multicolored line. Then you're kind of then you get to the top, you got this white dot at the top of the line. That's who you are. I said, Toody, that's not me. I'm much more than that. Couldn't prove it by me. Well, eventually he accepted that there is a three-dimensional world. And you know why he accepted it? Because when he had that dream about being in Lineland, he was so frustrated that they couldn't understand him. He finally said, look, I am a lion of lines. And I told him, I am a square of squares. Because as soon as you take a flat square and you start building them up, you get depth, and now you've got a cube. And that's our world. We are in the world of space. Length, height, depth. And that's our world. So Toody now understands that there is something beyond. Because just as he was there for the lion people, he realizes, I am to him what he was to them. What was really interesting is Toody asked me to show him the fourth dimension. And I said, I can't, there is no fourth dimension. And he said, there must be a fourth dimension. Because there's a 1, and I'm a 2, and it's the same principle. It's just mathematically the same to add the other and go to 3. If you do the same, there's got to be a 4. Well, you know what was interesting? Back in the 80s, this quantum physicist friend of mine told me that at Texas Instruments and other military and other places, Mathematicians and physicists were doing calculations in 32 space, he called it. Essentially the 32nd dimension. I said, 32nd dimension? I said, what does it look? Can you draw? Can you describe it? He said, absolutely not. He said, nobody has any idea what it is, except that it is mathematically sound, it follows mathematical law, and when we use these calculations, they use them for aerospace kind of things, space travel. He said when we use them and launch our satellites or our probes, they go where they're supposed to go. So obviously, the law is in effect. Now, where is our God in all of this? And where are we relative to Him? You know, I want us to consider some scriptures. And I want us to consider Toody here. Toody is very vulnerable. When I say God can be closer to you than you can be to yourself, I can see everything inside Toody. I mean, I didn't draw them all here, but all of his innards, his brain, everything. Because I'm not looking at you, I'm looking at the outside. A fourth dimensional or fifth dimensional person would not be bound by our limits. They're actually through them. Can you imagine? Now God can, but can you and I imagine if we're going to someone's house, and they say, well, go down here, turn right, go past past so-and-so's grain elevator, and then turn through. You kind of, okay, I got the left and the right, I got the past. What in the world is the through? It's not a direction. It's not a direction in the third dimension. But it probably is a direction in the fourth dimension. Because if you add squares of cubes of cubes, they've actually got videos where they frame that out and you can kind of see. And this becomes your outer boundaries. It's incredible. We become so transparent in the same way that I am to Toody. Now, let's just consider us and God a little bit. In Exodus chapter 33, Moses said to God, I beseech you, show me your glory. Show yourself to me. And he said, I'll make all my goodness pass before you. And I will proclaim the name of the Lord before you and will be gracious to whom I will be gracious and show mercy to whom I will show mercy. And he said, you can't see my face, for there shall no man see me and live. You know, he even describes himself in three-dimensional terms. God is not a three-dimensional being. God makes himself appear as a three-dimensional being to interact with his three-dimensional children. But when we see him as he is, there will be a largeness that it just, when we're able to comprehend it, it'll make sense. Right now, that's why God says, you can't see my face, and I'll put my hand. He uses all these physical analogies. The Lord said, behold, there is a place by me, and you shall stand upon a rock, and it shall come to pass that verse 22, while my glory passes by, he didn't say I'm going to show you even my body, he just said my glory, that I will put you in the cleft of a rock. I'll bury you deep in a cave, solid rock, and I will cover you with my hand while I pass by. And I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back parts, but my face you shall not see. In other words, you will see the tiniest, least part of my reality. God was essentially passing by Moses in the same way that you or I can pass by Toody and introduce. And Moses perceived things that are three-dimensional. He perceived the light. He perceived the movement. He perceived the thing going, passing through space. None of those are who God is, and none of those are his limits. That was just as limited as Toody, only able to see me as a line. And when I move across, he sees that line changing. When my right ear disappears and it's just the shoulder is the top, the line seems to shrink and lose the white part. Isn't that incredible? God can be closer to you than you can be to yourself. When it comes to, if I were, as God is to us, like I am to Toody, you know how easy it is for me to rescue Toody? You know how easy it is for me to perform miracles on his behalf? You know, think about it. His whole world, he's lined up with Glenn right now. So his whole world is aligned, so basically you can see Glenn and the pews. But if I turn him this way, you know, his whole world is only this wide. There's no width. Even this is fake because there's not even that much width in the truly flat plane. But none of this exists. None of this exists. You can only perceive what is in that immediate. But I can perceive, and suppose that in Flatland, suppose that Toody is walking along and there's a two-dimensional train. He's on the tracks and there's a two-dimensional train barreling around the corner, out of control. He doesn't see it. Okay? Can I rescue Toody?
No.
Sure. All I have to do is take him and I'm bigger than he is. I can pull him right into the third dimension. Two-dimensional train goes roaring by and I just stick him back in his own dimension. And what does he perceive? He's telling his friends about it. What happened? Praising concern. He's giving praise. What does he say? Well, it'll go something like a man I knew, a minister, a senior minister when I was younger, and he was out on a baptizing tour, driving across the country, and they were on a mountain road, 2-lane, and there's this truck came around, and I seem to remember it had lost its brakes. Anyway, it was out of control. And it was coming right at them. There was no time. There was nowhere to go. It was just so fast and so catastrophic that he just said there was not even time to react. And the way he describes it, he said it felt like someone grabbed the wheel. And he said, and 1 minute the truck was there, and the next second it was not. One instant it was there, and one instant it was past. We had passed and we had not collided. That was all he could say. Well, you know what? If God had taken that car or the truck or both or whatever, just went. That's exactly how you describe it. That's exactly how Toody would describe the train not hitting him. Isn't that incredible? God is closer to you and me than we can be to ourselves. You know, when we're sick, we got to go to the doctor, we got to go through umpteen MRIs, X-rays, tappings and bangings and all kinds of things to try to figure out. God can see every organ. You know, he sees where all the cells, he's got them, he knows the hair by name, by number rather, and there's nothing that he can't see on a regular basis. It's not like he's got to go do anything. Well, let me check this person out. Let me check out, oh, my, they got this going. No, it's right there. He can't get away from it. As our God, it's there. We are before him. Every organ, every blood vessel, every muscle, all the fat, the nerves, the condition of the nerves, the rogue cells that may be trying to take root somewhere and multiply. It's just not a problem for God. I mean, say this to Toody's heart. If he's got heart trouble, I can just, basically fix it up. I can get at it. Think how much more so God can get at us. I'm reminded of the lady whose children called and said, she lived way out. I never actually even met her. She lived so far out. They said, our mother's in intensive care. She's had a major heart attack. They think she's got another one coming. Could you come and pray for her? Well, I jumped in the car and drove and we got there. She was in intensive care. I can still remember it. It was a dark circular room. She was the only bed in there, all hooked up on everything. I went in. She seemed to flutter her eyes, but didn't respond I wasn't even sure she was conscious. And I prayed for her and anointed her as as it says in James chapter 5. And I left. There was nothing more I could do. I couldn't talk to her. I didn't hear a thing. About two months later, one of her kids showed up in church. I said, "Hey, how's your mom? Is she still with us?" They said, "Oh, you didn't hear?" I said, "She's fine." I said, "Really?" And they said, "It was a miracle." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "She remembers. The one thing she remembers is you coming in the room. And she remembers because the clock was over the door. She saw me and the clock, and she somehow noted the time, remembered the time. And she said she began getting better, and it made her curious, so she asked the doctors if she could look at her EKG records. And she said, here's her heart going like this, setting up for another attack. And at 11:30, she said the EKG just goes like this and never deviates. God's closer to you and me than we are to ourselves. There's never a situation where we have to think, oh God, you're far away. Oh God, if you could, David wrestles with this and prays that God's far off. Would you please hear me? God can't help but hear us. He can't help but see us. If he doesn't answer, if he doesn't immediately heal, it's because he's got something in mind. Because he's got something for us that he wants us to experience, to grow by, or whatever, for our good. There's never a time where he's not aware before whatever the problem is even begins to set up. Sin. Excitement, fear, love. Toody, his brain is right here. God knows our hearts, but God knows everything else. Science has come to understand that the brain, things happen in certain parts of the brain. So when we are excited about one thing, a certain part of the brain goes, all lights up. If we're thinking of something else, a different part of the brain goes, and it all lights up. If we're scared, one part of the brain is all sparkling. And all, you fill in all the blanks. It's all right there. All I have to do is look, and I know what Toody's thinking. And if he's thinking something wrong, I know he's setting up for sin before he even gets around to knowing it himself. Because first we're tempted, and then we're enticed, and then we plan, and then we act. And so when it first starts to be enticed, I know it. And God is with me and with you. It's just, it's so amazing. There is no God in the universe, in all the pantheon of gods that humans have ever come up with, or the demonic realm that sets themselves up as gods for the peoples of the earth. There is no God who is 100% love, who has no other motive. And it's only a God like that who could be as closer to us than we are to ourselves, and still love us, and still be committed to us, and even give his own life for us, so that we can become like he is. So that we are not trapped, like Toody is trapped in the second dimension. Oh, that I could let him join the congregation and interact with us at our level. I can't. But through Jesus Christ, God will take us beyond the 32nd dimension and whatever else exists that we don't even imagine. So, can you see a little bit, anyway, how God is closer to you and has got you? It's not just the footprints in the sand. It goes way, way, way beyond that. He has got you in his life, in his heart, in his hands, every minute of every day. Can we see that? And if so, I hope that there's a faith and a trust that can come from that reality. And so we can also understand and have not just pity, but have empathy with those who are not yet drawn to Jesus, who may not be able to accept that God exists beyond what they can perceive and understand. That's no different than any other being at any other level. We can only perceive what we can perceive. And God has to do something like I had to do something. I had to act on Toody before he could even perceive me. And God has to do that with human beings. So if you have a loved one who doesn't yet perceive, understand, or value the Lord, just realize God has not yet crossed their plane and said, I'm going to put myself into your presence and you're going to know me. And when he does, they will. And that's, again, something we should pray for. So I'd like to conclude the service today and have us read this chapter of Psalms together, almost as a prayer. And I'd like, if you would, I will read the first, or shall we say, the odd verses, and you read the even-numbered verses. So I'll read 1, you read 2, I'll read 3, you read 4 back to me. Okay? This is a psalm that really inspired Toody for me. And I think it really helps us understand how God is so close to us every moment of every day of our life. Psalm 139, verses 1 through 17. Lord, you have examined me and you know me. You know everything I do. You see me, whether I am working or resting. You know all my actions. Even before I speak, you already know what I will say. You are all around me on every side. You protect me with your power. Your knowledge to me is too deep. It is beyond my understanding. Where could I go to escape from you? Where could I get away from your presence? If I went to heaven, you would be there. If I lay down in the world of the dead, you would be there. If I flew away beyond the east or lived in the furthest place in the west, you would be there to lead me. You would be there to help me. I could ask the darkness to hide me or the light around me to turn into night. The darkness is not dark for you, and the light is like bright as the day. Darkness and light are the same to you. You created every part of me. You put me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because you are to be feared. All you do is strange and wonderful. I know it with all my heart. When my bones were being formed, carefully put together in my mother's womb, when I was growing there in secret, you knew that I was there. You saw me before I was born. The days allotted to me had been recorded in your book before any of them had ever begun. Let's read verse 17 together. O God, how difficult I find your thoughts, how many of them there are. And I know that we always come back around in our limited existence to that verse 17 thought, at which time just remember that God is closer to you than you can be to yourself. May God bless our hearing and consideration of his word. Loving Father, we bring these resources before you and lift them to you as a sign of wanting them, of our stewardship, Father, to you, of wanting to be your servants with our resources and wanting you to take them, Father, and put them to maximum use, to open doors, to create opportunity. Father, please, as this congregation moves forward, there will be financial need. We just ask that you help everyone, Father. If there is need for more, then bless this congregation. Bring the crops and the resources into their storehouses so they may honor you by bringing your portion and making what needs to happen, happen. Thank you for the faith of this congregation. Father, as we go forward, there's no question that you are leading like the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud as this church walks through the unknown toward a known destination, one that is undergirded by faith in you and faith in your goodness and your love. Father, commit ourselves into your hands for safekeeping. Thank you for the relationship that is here among these brethren. Thank you for the relationship that you've allowed me to have with them. And we just ask that you keep that treasure in your place for the future. And now we just ask that you release us, Father, to fellowship and enjoyment. Ask your blessing on the food. And we give you all thanks and all praise and joy in the name of Jesus Christ. And all God's people said, Amen.